What is up, NFL fans? Welcome back to another episode of the NFL Whip Around. I am Jeff Hartman, joined by Coach KT Smith. Coach, what's going on?
Hey Jeff, glad to be with you again, man. Another
Yeah,
crazy week in the NFL. They certainly are giving us plenty to talk about.
they are. Before we get there, we're in December now. I'm a huge Christmas guy. Are you a Christmas movie guy? Is that your cup of tea? I don't see you as a Christmas movie guy. I don't know why.
No, I mean I have two small kids, so I have to be a Christmas movie guy. As a matter of fact, as I was walking up the stairs to come do this, the old cartoon Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer from like 1962
Yes.
or whatever it was on, and
Yeah.
my
Classic.
daughter was all into it. So
There you
yeah.
go. That's great. So yeah. Without the kids, I bet you're just like a Grinch. I don't know why. I bet you're just like humbug. Forget this nonsense.
Not, man. I'm a nostalgic softie at heart, man.
No, well, good. Hey,
I,
I'm
I was
learning
out in the
something new.
yard putting up all the lights on Saturday
Oh,
and
so you
getting
do some
everything.
exterior illumination, do you? Huh?
I'm about as good at it as Clark Griswold. So
Well, I'm gonna have to share my video. I do go all out. I am like Clark Griswold, the finished product. So I'm gonna share my I'll have to share my video with on Twitter. I'll tag you in it so you can see what the
okay,
Hartmans did
sweet.
this year for sure. But
I
let's get
love
to
it.
the NFL. Let's get the NFL talk. Here we go. The San Francisco 49ers, they go to Philly. And this game was close early on, and then they just ran away with it. And so everyone's kind of talking rematch in the NFC Championship team. I'm sorry, NFC Championship game. Do you see it that way? Let's start there because there are other teams in the NFC that could find their way into the mix. The Dallas Cowboys, the Detroit Lions, just to name two. What do you think? Is this destiny to have another Philly San Francisco game in the NFC Championship game?
I mean, if I were putting my money on it, I would say that that's where we're headed. I know Dallas is playing great football, but I'm not going to be a Dallas believer until I see what they do in that stretch that they've got the last 3 weeks of the year. I think the last three
True.
weeks they play Philly and Buffalo, Miami, something like that. I can't remember who it is, but it's
Tough
a nasty
stretch.
stretch, yeah.
Yeah.
And then Detroit, same deal. I mean, the Lions haven't won a playoff game since 1991. They're a great story. They're playing really well, but when you haven't won a playoff game in over 30 years, you're on kind of a prove it deal.
Right.
So I mean, Philly and San Francisco, they've proven it. So I see that for sure right now as being the crash course, no doubt.
So so let's look at the two teams that played and 49ers obviously come out victorious. Is there a team that benefits from this game either way? Like, could the Philadelphia Eagles somehow, some way benefit from getting their butts kicked in front of their home crowd last Sunday?
Well, they're definitely trying to talk themselves into it right now. There was a whole lot of talk at my workplace today among Eagles fans of, hey, no, this is a good thing because San Francisco might have to come back here in January, and it's hard to beat a team twice in the same place and blah blah blah. But I think
Was Pez one of those guys?
oh, 100%, 100%. You're right. Brock Purdy is now the odds-on favorite right now to win the MVP, and Pez is still like he's a fraud. He's a fraud. So he's going to go down with that particular ship. But
For sure.
the Eagles fans right now for sure are telling them that, and there's some truth to that, no doubt. You and I remember as Steeler fans, right? I mean, I'll bet you remember this. 2005, the Steelers. Now this is a little bit different because they were on the road, but they go out to Indianapolis on a Monday night football game late in the season and just get torn up by Peyton Manning and the Colts, and then they got to go back to Indy, a month later in the playoffs, and they knock them off en route to the Super Bowl. I mean, you learn a lot from those situations. I think what the Eagles learned on Sunday was that they got to outscore teams. I mean, their defense is just not, it's not what the unit was a year ago. They've got some holes, and they can't, when Philadelphia went down the field, dominated the first quarter, but only came away with 2 field goals, they were in trouble. They've got to score touchdowns. So I think the Eagles have been masking some things with some of their late comebacks, et cetera, and they got exposed a little bit. And I think that can benefit them.
Would you feel the same way if the rematch was in California and not in Philly?
No, I think
Because
that
San Francisco can get that number 1 seed. That is still a very realistic option if you look at their schedules.
yeah, because Philly's got to go play in Dallas next
Yeah.
weekend. And they lose that, and now they have the same record as San Francisco. And
And San
now I don't
Fran
know
is
how it
head to
works
head.
with the three-way tiebreakers, because then you bring Detroit in and having the same record, and it gets a little more complicated. But if I were the Eagles, no, I certainly would not want to go out to San Francisco to play there. I think that the 49ers just have a lot going for them right now. They've gotten healthy. They've gotten through that stretch where they lost 3 games in a row. I don't know if you saw any of that game yesterday. Man, they looked fantastic.
Would you say that San Fran, in the short sample size, the short time period that we've had, is the best non-divisional rivalry right now in the NFL? Because these two fan bases, these two teams have been chirping since the NFC Championship game last year. If we would have had Brock Purdy, we would have been in the Super Bowl, and it just has gone on and on and on. I was actually shocked that San Francisco went in and did what they did to Philly in their own house in front of their fans. And they did it with some swagger. Like, that was the thing that got me. I mean, they didn't just go in and win. You saw Deebo Samuel. You saw all these guys going up to the fans saying, like, hey, we're sticking it to you right in your face in your stadium. What do you think about that? Best rivalry, non-divisional, Coach?
It's a great rivalry for sure, and I think the dislike is genuine. I believe that those teams are not posturing right now, even even when the sideline security guard gets thrown out. There's some legit beef happening right
Don
there.
Juan on the sideline gets kicked out of the game.
I'm telling you, that guy will be a Philly legend. That dude will not have to buy a beer or a cheesesteak in that town for a long time.
That's
But
hysterical.
But I will say this, man. If you the Niners had been pointing to that game, you're right, for almost a full calendar year, and they had that thing circled, and they had all their talking points lined up, and then they went there and they backed it all up, and it was really impressive. But to have to do it again, a month from now, 6 weeks from now, whatever, um, is going to be a challenge if it comes to that. Again, with what Philadelphia learned, the information Philadelphia got from that ball game. And then San Francisco putting so much energy into that win. That win meant a lot for them. I just think it'll be much more challenging the second time around. So if there's a team that benefits from this, it may be Philly if they get that game back in Philadelphia.
See, I could argue the other side of the coin and say the team that benefited the most was now that the San Francisco 49ers have injected themselves back into the discussion for that number 1 seed, getting the first round bye, hosting throughout the playoffs as long as they're in it, and making Philly come across the country. It's going to be a race to the finish between these top 4 teams in the NFC. It's going to be really exciting to see how that plays out. But let's go to the AFC for a second. For our second topic, let's talk about the AFC. It seems to be a log jam at the top. You have Miami, you have Baltimore, and then you have the Chiefs that are falling off. The Jaguars play on Monday Night Football, and then after those teams, it's literally like it's a crapshoot of crap, is what it is. It's a bunch of crappy teams that are all right around the same record. You've got Cleveland, they suck. Pittsburgh sucks right now; they have no quarterback, and you got a bunch of 6-6 teams that are just kind of hanging around. You've got the Indianapolis Colts, Minshew mania. You've got you talk about the Houston Texans, who just are kind of up and down with the rookie quarterback and CJ Stroud. I don't know what you think about this AFC, but if you were to pick a team to represent the conference in the Super Bowl right now, who would it be?
Well, the last time we had this conversation was about 4 weeks ago,
Mm-hmm.
and I believe you and I both said that we thought the Cincinnati Bengals might be the best team in the AFC and the team
Well,
most likely to
yeah.
represent them in the Super Bowl. And they're not even in the playoff conversation at this point.
Well, you lose your
So
all-pro quarterback, that matters.
it is true. That is true. But that could happen to anybody. I mean, a week ago, Miami was the number 4 seed. Right now, they're the number 1 seed. It just doesn't feel as though anybody in that AFC right now is on the level that Philadelphia and San Francisco are in the NFC, because the Dolphins, while they're playing great football, I want to see them do it against an elite team. I mean, they've been beating up on bottom feeders. They trounced Washington, who's packed it in on Sunday, and but until they do it against a good football team, there's going to be questions about them. I mean, the Ravens, I think if to answer your question, if I had to put money on anybody, right now I'd put it on the Ravens, but they can't escape the injury bug. I know that makes you a little sick to your stomach there, but they seem to have a new significant injury just about every week. Kansas City, can't get their offense together. I mean, they're averaging 19 points a game over the last 6 weeks. That is so un-Kansas City like. And I don't know if anybody really totally buys Jacksonville just yet. So it's hard to make a case for any of those teams.
Yeah, the AFC, it just like the NFC, very top heavy. The most battle tested team. You want to talk about battle tested, as in they played good teams, they've beaten good teams. You have to say the Ravens. I just threw up in my mouth a little bit when I said that, but yeah, you have to take the Ravens. I mean, they blew the doors off the Detroit Lions, who's considered an NFC powerhouse in their own building. Now they're on a bye week and they're going to come off that, and they're going to play the Rams, who are a hot team all of a sudden. And Matthew Stafford, they're playing better football. Kansas City is always going to be Kansas City. It's going to be a tough out. I agree with you about Miami, though, by the way. They have to beat a team that is considered a legitimate contender for me to start really buying in to them as contenders. I think they're capable. They just haven't done it yet. And so, I mean, they have some tough games coming up. They're going to have opportunities. I know they have Dallas still on their schedule. They have Buffalo again still on their schedule. So they have some tough games coming up. But the AFC, outside of, you look at the records and you look at the teams that are vying for a playoff spot, it is pretty wide open. But I do often look at the NFC and AFC very similar in the fact that we talked about this before, Coach. There's that top tier, there's that creme de la creme, the cream of the crop, and then there is just a whole bunch of other stuff and then some bottom feeders. Do you think in the AFC or the NFC, are any of those teams that are the other stuff, could they actually contend and actually make some noise in the playoffs?
I think there have been some teams that started the season poorly that have pulled themselves up to respectability. Like Denver, they had that bad 0-3 start, and they're 6-6. Could have been 7-5. Lost that heartbreaker to the Texans. The Rams have kind of come back from the dead to get themselves into playoff contention. Green Bay, similarly, right? I mean, they're now back in the conversation after that big win over Kansas City. I mean, you look at the standings. I mean, just there's a lot of 6-6 teams at the moment. Minnesota, Green Bay, Atlanta, the Rams, Seattle, Denver. I mean, it's just a ton of mediocrity. Buffalo. I mean, some of those teams we expected to be better. Many of those teams are, for whatever reason, sort of like trending towards the middle, and they can all beat each other on any given week. So, yeah, it's just sort of a small group of really good teams at the top, a small group of really awful teams at the bottom, and then a big blender of mediocrity in the middle.
Yeah, or crap, as I call it. So let's say, okay, you gotta pick one. Who's your AFC representative in the Super Bowl? We did it with the Bengals a couple weeks ago. Put the kiss of death on someone else. Please say Baltimore. Go ahead.
Baltimore Ravens. Kiss of death.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. I agree with that 100%. All right. Let's talk a little NFC, AFC right now. And this is always something I've been ever since I was a little kid. And I remember my parents got me the NFL sheets and matching curtain set, which had every team on it. And it had the NFC and the AFC logo. And I used to stare at that. And I used to say, which conference is better? Like, which is better? Of course, I always thought the AFC because the Steelers were in the AFC. But I've always been obsessed with this AFC versus NFC. And I don't know if it's the culminating event that is the Super Bowl. Maybe. I don't know. But the NFC teams won 4 or 5 interconference games on Sunday. And they lead the AFC 31-29 in head-to-head matchups this season. Do you think that the NFC is better right now?
Well, it's interesting because if you think back to the beginning of the year, all everybody talked about was how deep the AFC was. All these great quarterbacks in the AFC, this laundry list of great quarterbacks, and the quarterbacks in the NFC all stunk. And the AFC was going to be a much better conference. And that's not the case. I still think the AFC is slightly better, but only because this is going to be terrible grammar. They have less worse teams in the AFC, like in the AFC, there's really only one awful team, and that's the Patriots. And oh my God, does it sound weird and also fabulous to say that?
Awesome. It's freaking awesome.
Right. I mean, there's some teams that aren't very good. Tennessee's not very good, but they're not awful. But I think in the NFC, I think Washington right now is awful. Carolina is awful. I think Arizona, even though, oh my God, they humiliated the Steelers on Sunday, they're a bad football team. And then you've got some teams in the NFC that, like the Giants that are just barely keeping their head above awful. So I think I don't think that that's a way to necessarily compare the two, but it feels like overall the AFC is slightly better. I think the NFC is worse at the bottom, but I think the NFC is better at the top.
Shout out Tommy DeVito for keeping the
Um,
Giants above awful.
yeah, that's
I
because
love
that's because
that.
Brian Dable is afraid he's going to get whacked if he doesn't if he doesn't play him.
Okay, yeah, no, I agree with you. And it's so funny that the Carolina Panthers have actually the first team eliminated from playoff contention. Like that's official. Like they are eliminated from the postseason. Not that there was any doubt about it, but they are the first official team to be having that little X on the when you look at the standings, it says eliminated. I kind of agree with you. And really, this is so tough. The NFL will look at this and say 31-29. Like that's perfect parity between the conferences. That's exactly what they want. I'll look at this and think, well, again, it's the top of the top tiers are the strength of the conferences, and then after that, I just feel is mediocre at best. That's the thing. It's at best. It's not like, oh wow, like these teams are so great and they're just killing each other. No, not to me. Not to me at all. And so even though the AFC might have more teams like Tennessee that are, just above good, they're not good. They're not a playoff team. And it's just I don't know. Again, if you're just taking the elite teams, you have to take the NFC right now. How could you not? How could you not take after watching San Francisco beat a 10-1 Philadelphia Eagles team on the road, watching Dallas do what they do almost on a weekly basis when they're not playing a team like San Francisco or Philadelphia, watching Detroit, even though they almost let the Saints back into the game on Sunday, they still came out and scored 21 first quarter points. Like that's a good football team. They're putting it together as they go. I don't know. This is weird. Sadly, I guess then you look at those. I just named those teams. Then you have the NFC South, which is a 6-6 led division. I think with Atlanta, is Atlanta that's 6-6
Yeah,
and leading
yeah,
the
they're in
division?
first now. It's their turn to be in first.
They're going to host a home game. One of those teams is going to host a home playoff game. That
Yeah,
is,
yeah,
it's
and I
horrible.
mean, and they could win it. I mean, you think back to Seattle back in remember the
Yep.
Beastquake game, the Marshawn Lynch game, knocked off an 11-5 New Orleans team. I think Seattle was 7-9, and you get that game at home, and you never know. So that'll be
Yeah.
fascinating to watch.
Absolutely, but I don't think we'll know the NFC versus AFC anytime soon. It probably won't be settled till the Super Bowl. It's going to be something to keep tabs on. Let's talk about a position that maybe doesn't get the love that it should outside of the big names, as we're talking about the tight ends. Tight ends around the league are just absolutely having tremendous seasons. Sam Laporta of Detroit, 9 catches for 140 yards on Sunday. The week prior, Pat Fryermuth of Pittsburgh went off from us the exact same stat line. Trey McBride went off against Pittsburgh, 8 for 89. It was like a one-man passing game for the Cardinals. TJ Hawkinson's been great. Travis Kelce's a household name. Thank you, Taylor Swift. Why do you think we're seeing such production from the tight end position?
Yeah, it really is an amazing run now with the tight ends, and I think there's two things that jump out. First of all, the body type at that position has changed. When I was a kid, and I think back to some of the great tight ends of that day, Dave Casper of the Raiders and Russ Francis of New England, but they were bigger, sort of slower guys who were predominantly blockers and they you could use them up the seam a little bit, but they were not athletes like on par at all with the guys that you get at the position today. I mean, you're getting 6'5", 255-pound guys who can really run, and they're just the way that the game has spread out with offenses now moving more towards 11 personnel, 3 wide receivers, and a tight end and being able to flex those tight ends out into the slot and get them matched up on safeties or outside linebackers. The speed and quickness with which they have combined with the size makes those guys automatic mismatches. And then you factor in the way that the officiating has changed and the way that it's become almost impossible now to contact those guys. I mean, you get a big tight end like that, a release beyond 5 yards down the field, and then it becomes almost impossible to defend that individual if you can't put your hands on them. So offenses really are looking for ways to be versatile with the pieces that they have on the field. And if you can get a guy who, like a Pat Fryermuth, who can put his hand in the ground and block down, and then on the very next snap, you can split him out wide and match him up against the safety. and not have to change personnel and give the defense the opportunity to do the same thing, you've got a huge advantage. So offenses, I think, have realized that the tight end is one of the most versatile chess pieces in this matchup with defenses now.
So let's compare this modern generation of tight end, and let's compare it to the early 2000s. When I think back to that era, which isn't as long ago as like Dave Casper that you brought up, you talk about Antonio Gates, you talk about Tony Gonzalez, you talk about Jason Witten, Heath Miller. You bring up, I'm trying to think of some other tight ends that were really prominent back then. You can go to Todd Heap in Baltimore as another one. What's the difference, though, between those guys of that generation, which they were very good players? I mean, Antonio Gates put up some crazy numbers for tight ends, and so did Tony Gonzalez, both with the Chiefs and the Falcons. What's the difference, in your opinion, as a coach, between those players and the current crop of tight end?
I think two things. One, the emphasis on getting the ball out of quarterbacks' hands fast so quickly these days has made that tight end so valuable because they're just so good in short space. I mean, the ability, Travis Kelce in those underneath zones is almost impossible to cover because, again, man, he's just big and physical enough to be able to shrug guys off at the line, box them out. You can throw him open, meaning like if he's covered, you can just put the ball in a spot and he's going to get it. And that wasn't the case back, when you named a lot of those guys. You think the Heath Miller and the Steelers. I mean, Ben Roethlisberger was really a downfield passer. He was only throwing short, quick passes if he had to check the ball down. And a lot of the balls that Heath Miller caught were deep throws up the seam off of play action looks. And now you're getting into 5 wide sets. Forget the play action. Quarterbacks are just catching the ball and releasing it in under 2 seconds. And those tight ends are quick enough to create space for themselves in the underneath zones. And again, teams are so terrified now of pass interference calls that it's gotten harder for them to sustain man coverage without help on the outside. So you help on the outside. Now your tight ends are one-on-one in the slot. So I think that the nature of the way the passing game has evolved has made these guys more valuable.
Okay. Real quick before we go to our next topic, did you see the officiating in that Sunday night game between the Packers and Chiefs?
I was tempted to bring it up. I thought we might go down the rabbit hole again.
Oh, I'm telling you,
but
man.
You're right. How do you? I mean, one comment. All right, I know you love when I go off on this, but how do you have a roughing or a personal foul for hitting a quarterback while he's still inbounds running with the football? I mean, that was mind-boggling to me.
Hey, obviously, as Steeler fans, they play against Lamar Jackson twice a year, typically. And we've seen Lamar Jackson, look like he's going out of bounds and then stay in bounds for another 5 or 6 yards and before he goes out. Well, if he's going to do that, you tattoo him every time. But guess what? You're going to draw a 15-yard flag. You can't touch him. You cannot touch him. And so even if you shoved him, they would throw the flag. It's a lose-lose situation. We've said it before. I'm not going to go down on a tangent here, but it's impossible to play defense anymore in the NFL.
Yeah,
it's impossible.
Absolutely.
I don't know how you could do it. No idea. All right, let's go to the last topic, something we rarely talk about on the NFL Whip Round. Why? Because it's not the National Football League. It's actually about college football and the playoff selection committee when they chose Michigan, Washington, Texas, and Alabama for the 4-team playoff. They excluded the undefeated ACC championship Florida State and the 2-time defending champion Georgia, who has 1 loss. Did they get it right, in your opinion? What do you think, Coach?
In my opinion, they had no choice but to get it wrong because they set themselves up for failure. Because the moment that you decided that you would have 5 power conferences, but only 4 playoff selections, you set yourself up for failure. And it's amazing they went as long as they did without this type of a dilemma where you really you were going to contradict your own logic, because there's 2 ways to look at it, right? It's either you prove it on the field, which Florida State did by going 13-0 and playing a challenging non-conference schedule. They blow out LSU on the road. I mean, that's an impressive win. And they win their conference championship. Those are 2 huge points of emphasis of that committee, right? The play on the field matters. Well, and then they take that and they throw that out the window. But then if you want to make the argument that, well, we included the best teams, well, you excluded maybe the best team in Georgia. I mean, if people don't think Georgia's one of the 4 best teams, they haven't watched any college football. I mean, they won 29 games in a row, and then they lost to Alabama a huge rival and a nail biter, and suddenly they're not one of the best 4 teams. So I just think that they had an impossible task. However, whoever they chose, there was going to be people rightfully slighted, and it's their own fault for, creating a 4-team playoff chosen by a committee.
I always want the best matchup. I really don't care how they slice it. I want the best matchups because I'm not a college football guy. I just don't have time. That's plain and simple. I just don't have time. I've spent so much time on the Steelers in the National Football League. I just don't have time with 5 little kids to add another realm into my football world. So I will watch the playoffs. I will watch some of these bowl games because it piques my interest. I don't want to see another situation like last year where, yes, TCU made it to the national title game, but then got their doors blown off. That's not entertaining. That's not fun. I remember when Notre Dame would get in and Alabama would just make them look foolish on a national stage because they're just not up to snuff. I agree. I think that, if they're looking for the best matchups, I understand why Florida State didn't get in because I don't know about their quarterback situation. I know they lost their starting quarterback. No, you can't penalize an organization, or I guess you call it an organization, or a school, university, because of an injury to a player, especially when they go out and still win their conference championship. But I don't think that's going to be one of the best matchups. Having Georgia not in, I think, really hurts. And that's probably because they're saying we can't have 2 SEC schools in the top 4. I say, why not? Hell, I think Ohio State would make for a good game, even if they got in there. What did they lose? 1 game to Michigan? And they're out?
On one drive, man. They score on that final drive. They're in. Michigan's out. It's crazy.
And a lot of people aren't even saying like, oh my gosh, Ohio State didn't even have a prayer because they lost 1 game. It's the same thing with Georgia. So this is what they get. This is what you get. Like you said, when you have the 5 power conferences and only 4 openings, if they would make it 6, you'd be fine. You could give 2 a bye and have a play-in round and all that stuff. You'd be fine. Aren't they going to go to 8 soon? Anyways,
they're going to 12 next year, which that doesn't make sense to me. I thought 8 was the optimum number. You got 5 power conferences, and that gives you 3 at-large bids. You can get one of those non-power 5 schools in there, and then you could get a Georgia and Ohio State in, and it sounds like a great number. I don't know, 12's a little bulky for me. The thing that bothers me is it's chosen by a committee, and it really, I don't want to call it a popularity contest, but they're doing it for television too. Like you can't tell me that, like, if Deion Sanders was the head coach of Florida State, that they wouldn't get in. There's 100% chance that if Deion was at Florida State, they would put him in. So there's all these non-football considerations. There's all these things that, again, man, get thrown into the mix by people who, I don't know how much these guys know football. My God, Condoleezza Rice, the former Secretary of State, was on the football committee for a long time, the college selection committee. What the hell is she doing on the college selection committee? It doesn't make sense. So,
well, and even if they're going for television, you would want the best matchups. And I'm sorry, is Washington one of those teams? They're not going to have the draw of a Georgia. They're not going to have the draw of an Ohio State either. So you can say what you want about them winning and beating Oregon twice and the Pac-12, which is going to be debunked next year anyways. All this stuff that's happened, if you want the best matchups, this isn't it, in my opinion. So if you're doing it for television, I get the Deion Sanders. Coach Prime would be there because he's entertaining. He's going to have people talking about him, love him, hate him, whatever. You're going to be talking about him. Washington's not that team. In Texas, didn't they lose to Oklahoma earlier this year?
Yeah, but they beat Alabama. So if you put in Alabama, you can't
See,
exclude Texas. It's ridiculous.
Exactly.
It's
ridiculous.
ridiculous.
Is what they painted themselves into a corner.
Correct.
This is what you get. This is what you get. And by the way, college sports anymore, with the transfer portal and all that stuff, it's become even more difficult to follow, in my opinion. Do you agree, Coach?
Well, it's funny, I texted you before we came on because I was a little bit late because I was talking to a college coach on the phone who's recruiting one of our players, and they've been back and forth on him for a long, long time, and they made him an offer tonight, which was wonderful. But they did it only after they kind of figured out what was going on with their transfers. They essentially had to navigate the transfer issues before they could even get to the high school kids, which is such a shame because it's really reducing opportunities for a lot of these high school guys. I mean, you're seeing colleges say, hey, I'd rather take a chance on a 20-year-old who already has acclimated to college football than a 17-year-old who's sitting in a high school, biology class right now, and who there's a lot of variables about how he's going to adjust to college life. It's gotten a lot harder as a high school coach for me to advise some of these young guys about what to do in regard to college, unless you're one of those elite guys that's getting a host of Power 5 offers. Navigating the landscape now has become incredibly difficult because it's difficult for college coaches with guys coming and going. Ohio State's quarterback entered the transfer portal yesterday. And I mean, because evidently, because what you're hearing is that Ohio State's going after another quarterback. They think that they can, it's like free agency, man.
Yeah, that's what I don't like. I mean, I used to love the fact that if a quarterback was at a college, you were going to have him for the 3 to 4 years before he went to the NFL. And even when they were downtimes, I mean, Peyton Manning stayed at Tennessee. He could have left. I'm sure if there was a transfer portal after his first 2 seasons there. I don't know. Again, that's another talking point for another day. But let's finish this up with our player profile, like we always do every week on Tuesday for the NFL Whip Around. And this time it is a quarterback in the NFC North. Green Bay Packers quarterback Jordan Love. Coach, what do you want to say about the Love Boat, as I call him?
Yeah, and they were last night. Green Bay, or on Sunday Night Football, Green Bay ran the Eagles quarterback sneak play, and they called it the Love Shove, which I thought was pretty good. Jordan Love, yeah, interesting, right? Because he gets drafted a couple years ago out of UCLA, and he comes to the Packers, and Aaron Rodgers is firmly entrenched there, and he's kind of given the cold shoulder in a similar way that Rodgers was when Brett Favre was playing out his final days in Green Bay. And they always say that you never want to succeed the legend. And it looked there for a little bit early on in the season like Jordan Love was just not ready for prime time. He made some big mistakes, some big interceptions. The Packers didn't get off to a great start. There was just a lot of talk about him not necessarily being the guy. And when you're part of a legacy that the two guys who preceded you are Brett Favre and Aaron Rodgers, there's a lot to live up to. But quietly, I mean, Jordan Love's really turned it around. I mean, in his last 3 games, he's thrown for almost 900 yards. He's got 8 touchdowns and no interceptions. The Packers have rallied back to 6-6. If the playoffs started today, they'd be in. And he's playing some great football. And I was really impressed with him on Sunday night. He outplayed Patrick Mahomes. I mean, very poised, just seemed to have a really good handle for what he's doing. And the Green Bay fans loved him. So, yeah, man, I mean, it's nice to see a guy start to turn the narrative around like he's doing.
Yeah, I am a firm believer in arm talent. And some people will say, well, what does that mean? Like, it's not tangible. You see it. I'll give you some other names of quarterbacks that have really good arm talent. Like you see Will Levis throw the ball. Like the dude's got some arm talent. Whether he has the intangibles between the ears, that's neither here nor there. CJ Stroud has some damn good arm talent. Patrick Mahomes might be have the best arm talent I've seen in a really long time when it comes to a quarterback. Jordan Love's got some good arm talent too. I really like watching him throw the ball. We saw him when he played the Steelers at Acrisure Stadium. That was a game that came down to the wire. Some of these throws these guys make, I mean, Coach, it's insane. They're throwing sidearm. I mean, the arm angles, the way they change their arm slot and the delivery, it's almost like a pitcher. It's really fun to watch. I love watching those guys throw. Sometimes I wish the Steelers quarterback had a little bit more arm talent, but still, do you see what I see, or am I just nuts? The arm talent thing.
Oh no. Arm talent is not an issue for a lot of the guys coming into the league right now. It's everything else. It's the reading the defense and the processing and the accuracy and all those types of things. And sometimes it takes that, sometimes those guys figure it out. Josh Allen's a great example, tremendous arm talent there. And for the most part, he's now figured out the mental part of the game. It looks like Jordan Love's starting to do that a little bit himself.
Absolutely. It's going to be fun to watch. And hey, the Packers, a lot of people were doubting their motives when they drafted him in the first round. A lot of people were wondering, is this really the succession plan after Aaron Rodgers? Well, I don't think they have that solidified answer just yet. I think they're feeling a lot better about themselves than they were just a few weeks ago. So good player profile there, Coach. Hey, what's on the call sheet this week? I'm looking forward to that one.
Yeah, the call sheet, we're going to do a little deeper dive into that Philly-San Francisco game, look a little bit at what makes that San Francisco offense so good. Talking a little bit about metrics this week too, and how heavily reliant coaches are on metrics for some of their play calling and some of their scouting. So, and then we're going to for Steelers fans, do a call sheet breakdown on the turning point in that ugly loss on Sunday to the Cardinals, and where it all went wrong for the Steelers.
Why? No. Yeah, I get it. It's okay. Coach, so where can we find you on Twitter?
At KT Smith FFSN.
If you haven't followed him yet, make sure you do it. If you want to hear our content on the Steel Curtain Network about the Pittsburgh Steelers, wherever you get your podcast, search Steelers. You'll find us. We're right there in the top 4, and also steelcurtainnetwork.com. And I will say this, make sure you check out fansfirstsports.com. That website is young. It is growing. Some really great content there on the main page. You'll see some of that from Coach KT Smith here. I'm sure you've already seen it, but more coming. It's really an up and coming thing. I'm looking forward to that. So check that out. In the meantime, Coach, thanks for your time. We'll talk next Tuesday. Take it easy.